My name is Malene Brennan. I've always been the reliable one in my family, the person everyone turns to in times of need, the one who steps up no matter what. It's been that way for as long as I can remember. Maybe it's because I grew up in a household where family meant everything. We didn't have much, just enough to keep the lights on and food on the table, but we had each other. My parents worked tirelessly. This is the story of how I broke that trust, how I crossed lines I should never have crossed, and how I hurt someone I love more than anything. It's not a story I'm proud to tell, but it's the truth. Her words hit me like a slap, but I knew she was right. I had turned Jet into someone he never wanted to be, and I hated myself for it. A few days later, Jet told me he needed time away. He said he wasn't angry, but needed to process everything. Hearing that broke me, but I knew it was necessary. As much as it hurt, I had to let him go. For days, I replayed his words in my mind until they felt etched into my very being. I don't even know how to tell you this, but I felt like I couldn't say no to you for a long time. Each time I thought of it, the guilt grew heavier, suffocating me. For years, I had convinced myself that what we shared was mutual, that I was helping him, loving him in the way he needed. But now, all I could see was the damage I had caused. I wanted to make it right, to undo the pain, but every time I tried to reach out, I froze. What could I possibly say to erase the harm I'd done? Every word I thought of felt insufficient, like trying to mend a broken dam with a piece of tape. I knew I couldn't leave things unresolved, though. Jet deserved an apology. He deserved to hear me take full responsibility. So, I wrote him a letter. Dear Jet, I don't even know where to begin. How do I apologize for something I can't fully explain, even to myself? All I know is that I've hurt you in ways I never intended, and for that, I am so deeply sorry. When your mom passed away, I promised myself I would protect you no matter what. I thought I was doing that, but somewhere along the way I lost sight of what that really meant. I crossed boundaries that should never have been crossed, and in doing so, I took away something I can never give back: your trust. And if sharing it can make even one person stop and think before making the same mistakes I did, then maybe it's worth it. You said you felt like you couldn't say no to me. And that broke me because the last thing I ever wanted was for you to feel trapped or like you didn't have a choice. I can't change what's already happened, but I can promise you this. From now on, I will respect your boundaries. I will give you the space you need to discover who you are without me hovering over you. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it, but I hope that one day you'll be able to look back on the good memories we shared and know that, despite my failures, I always loved you. I'm so sorry, Jet, for everything. Love, Aunt Malene. I left the letter on his desk one morning while he was out with Bryson. I didn't expect an immediate response, but the waiting was excruciating. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leapt, only to sink when I realized it wasn't him. Days turned into weeks with no word. I began to wonder if I had lost him forever. Then, one evening, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Jet standing there, looking older than his 19 years. He held the letter in his hand, folded and creased as though he had read it countless times. For a moment, we just stood there, neither of us knowing what to say. Can we talk? He asked softly, his voice steady. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. We sat in the living room, the silence between us heavy, but not hostile. Finally, he broke it. Jet adored his mom, Chloe. She was his anchor, his entire world. She was the kind of parent who made every moment special, cheering him on at soccer games, staying up late to help with projects, and sitting beside him during thunderstorms because she knew how much he hated the sound of rain on the windows. I've been thinking a lot, he said, staring at the letter in his hands. About us, about everything. And I don't know if things will ever go back to how they were. His words stung, but I knew they were true. I don't expect them to, I said quietly. I just want you to know that I'm here. Whatever you need, whether it's space, time, or nothing at all, I'll respect it. He looked up at me then, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a glimmer of the boy I used to know in his eyes. I'm willing to try, he said, to rebuild, but it's going to take time. That's all I could ever ask for, I replied, my voice trembling. We sat there for a while, not saying much, simply sharing the space. It felt fragile, uncertain, but real. I wish I could say that's where the story ends, but the truth is, I don't know what comes next. I'm still figuring it out, still trying to understand how I let things get this far and how to move forward. I know I've made terrible mistakes, and I don't know if they can ever truly be undone. But I want to try. For Jet, for myself, for the chance to be better. Their bond was rare and unshakable. But life doesn't care about bonds. So now I turn to you. What do you do when you've hurt someone you love? How do you make amends for something so unforgivable? I don't have the answers, but maybe you do. If you've ever been in a situation like this, or even if you haven't, what would you do? How would you try to fix it? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm here to learn, to listen, and to grow. And before you go, if this story resonated with you or made you think, I'd love for you to like this video. It not only lets me know you were here, but also helps this story reach others who might need to hear it. Thank you for being here and for being part of this discussion. Your thoughts and insights mean more than you know. Chloe's life ended suddenly. She was driving home late one night after a long double shift at the hospital. She was exhausted. And then there was the drunk driver. He ran a red light, and in an instant, Chloe was gone. Jet was only 12 years old. I'll never forget the call. It was almost midnight, and the phone rang so loudly it startled me. When I picked up, it was Curtis Clark, a family friend who had been contacted by the police. His voice was shaking as he told me, "She didn't make it." My heart sank, and all I could think about was Jet. How was I going to tell him? How do you explain to a boy that the person who was his entire world isn't coming back? When I arrived at the house, Jet was sitting on the couch, his knees pulled up to his chest, staring at the front door as if he was waiting for her to walk through it. He didn't cry, not at first. He just sat there, silent and lost. When I knelt in front of him and told him she was gone, it was as if the light in his eyes went out. He didn't say a word. He just collapsed into my arms, sobbing so hard I thought he might break. My mom balanced 2 jobs, and my dad spent long days on construction sites. And then there was me, the youngest of 4 siblings, always trying to keep the peace in a house that was as noisy and chaotic as it was filled with love. From that moment on, I became everything to Jet. His dad had been out of the picture for years, leaving when Jet was just a toddler. Chloe had raised him alone, and now that she was gone, there was no one else. I stepped in because I had to. He needed me, and I wasn't going to let him down. At first, it was the basics, making sure he had food, clothes, and a safe place to sleep. But it quickly became much more. Jet was grieving, and he didn't know how to cope. He stopped talking to his friends, his grades dropped, and he became a shadow of the boy he once was. He was angry at the world, at the driver who took his mom, and maybe even at her for leaving him, just like his dad had. About 6 months after Chloe's death, he finally broke his silence. I was helping him with his math homework when, out of nowhere, he said, "It's not fair. She was all I had." His voice cracked, and when he looked at me, tears filled his eyes. Why did she have to leave? What mistake did I make? Hearing those words shattered me. I wanted to reassure him that it wasn't his fault, that sometimes life is just unkind. But I knew such words wouldn't be enough. So, I did the only thing I could. I wrapped my arms around him and said, "I'm here, Jet. You're not alone. I'm here." From that moment on, I dedicated myself to filling the emptiness Chloe's absence had left behind. I attended every soccer match, supported him with every school assignment, and ensured he felt loved. But no matter what I did, I wasn't Chloe. I couldn't replace her, and maybe that's where the fractures began. Jet began relying on me for everything. He reached out to me for every small decision, from choosing his picture day outfit to seeking advice on school troubles. He even began avoiding outings with his friends just to spend more time with me. "You're the only one I can talk to, Aunt Malene," he said to me one day, his tone heavy with a mix of sadness and appreciation. I learned early on how to solve problems, whether it was helping my brothers with their homework or listening to my sister vent about a boy who had broken her heart. I was the one they came to. I didn't mind, though. "You actually listen!" Those words gave me a sense of purpose, making me believe I was providing him with something no one else could. But not everyone saw it the same way. Curtis, my cousin and one of the few family members who stayed connected, started voicing his concerns. "You're doing an incredible job," he told me cautiously over coffee one day. "But Jet needs to learn how to stand on his own. He's depending on you for everything, and that's not healthy for either of you." At the time, I dismissed his worries, convincing myself that Curtis didn't grasp what Jet had endured or how much he truly needed me. But in hindsight, I see that Curtis was right. I wasn't just supporting Jet. I was clinging to him, trying to be everything for him because I couldn't bring myself to let go. In doing so, I blurred boundaries that should never have been crossed. I didn't recognize it then, But cracks were already forming. Cracks in Jet's ability to grow, cracks in my judgment, and cracks in a bond that, though built on love, was slowly becoming something it was never meant to be. Jet started to change when he turned 15. His voice deepened, his shoulders broadened, and the quiet, reserved boy I had protected for years began transforming into someone new, someone unfamiliar. I should have felt proud, and in some ways, I did. But it also filled me with fear. He was growing up, moving away from the safe little world we'd created together, and I didn't know what that meant for me. At first, the changes were subtle. He began spending more time alone in his room, shutting the door when he used to leave it open. He laughed at my jokes less, brushed off my offers to help with homework, and spent hours glued to his phone instead of talking to me the way he once did. I reassured myself that it was normal, that every teenager goes through phases like this, but it didn't ease the ache in my chest whenever he chose solitude over my company. Then he met Scarlett Larson. She was one of his classmates, vibrant, outgoing, and effortlessly charming in that way only 15-year-old girls seem to be. Jet couldn't stop talking about her. Every other sentence he spoke was about something funny or interesting she had done. In fact, I liked being the person they could count on, the one who could make things better. As I got older, I carried that role with me. I went to college, became a guidance counselor, and spent my days listening to others' struggles and helping them find their way forward. I loved my work. I thought I was good at it. I believed helping people was my purpose. Scarlett would mention things in class or display her impressive soccer skills, and for the first time in years, he appeared truly content. I should have been glad for him, but instead, I felt a knot form in my stomach every time her name was mentioned. "It feels like I'm losing him," I admitted to Curtis one afternoon while he was visiting for coffee. "He doesn't need me anymore." Curtis paused, giving me a serious, thoughtful look before replying, "Malene, that's a good thing. Jet is maturing. He's supposed to rely on you less." I didn't voice my disagreement, but deep down I couldn't accept it. I couldn't envision my life without Jet depending on me. I didn't know who I was without him. The first time something happened, I told myself it was accidental. At least that's what I wanted to believe. Jet had stayed up late working on a school project, and I found him asleep on the couch, his papers scattered all around. As I went to cover him with a blanket, just as I had done countless times before, I paused. His shirt had ridden up slightly, exposing a small portion of his lower back. My hand stopped, hovering for a moment longer than it should have, and something inside me shifted. A wave of guilt surged through me, tightening my chest, but I pushed it aside. I tucked him in and headed to bed. It was seemingly trivial instances like these, brief, fleeting moments that seemed harmless in isolation, but together, they formed something far greater. A touch on his shoulder that lingered too long, a compliment that felt unusually intimate. I kept convincing myself it was all innocent, that it was just me being caring, but deep down, I knew otherwise. The first real boundary we crossed was in the kitchen. Jet had just come home from soccer practice, drenched in sweat and visibly worn out but still beaming with excitement. He was recounting how Scarlett had scored the winning goal, his enthusiasm lighting up the room. I couldn't take my eyes off him. His flushed face, his damp hair, and the unguarded way he looked at me, so trusting and open. My heart raced, and I couldn't explain why. One moment we were laughing, and the next I leaned in. I kissed him. It was fleeting, barely more than a soft brush of my lips against his, but it was enough. Then Chloe, my sister, lost her husband. He froze, his eyes wide with shock, and for a moment I thought he was going to step back. But he didn't. He approached me steadily, his gaze intense as if piercing into mine. "What are we doing?" he asked, and before I could respond, he grabbed my waist and pulled me close. His soft lips pressed against mine, and before we could comprehend what was happening, I found myself lying flat on the floor with Jet over me. He unbuckled his belt with urgency as I slid my pants off my hips. Neither of us was thinking anymore. Jet gently stroked my left thigh, his hand slowly moving up to my waist, while he kissed and licked my neck. I moaned loudly, holding him tightly. It was the most intense moment I had ever experienced with Jet. Yes, it was wrong. I knew it. But I couldn't stop us. In that moment, I couldn't resist him. After that, everything changed. We convinced ourselves it wasn't wrong, telling each other it wouldn't hurt anyone if no one found out. But deep down, I knew it was wrong. And I think Jet did too. We normalized it, making excuses. And it felt right until I overheard a conversation between Jet and his best friend, Bryson. They had met at school a few months into our relationship, and by then, Jet had started sharing his thoughts with Bryson. Bryson Blackwell was a 16-year-old with wisdom beyond his years, often giving advice that seemed far too mature for his age. Jet trusted him, maybe even more than he trusted me, and I could sense the strain it was causing. One evening, their voices carried through the thin walls of the house, and though I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, I couldn't help but hear them. "I don't know what to do," Jet said, his voice low and full of frustration. "It's like I can't stop, but I'm not even sure if I want this anymore." "What do you mean?" Bryson asked. Her son, Jet, was just 12, a boy who suddenly had to grow up far too quickly. Chloe tried her best, but losing her husband broke her. She needed someone to step in, and so did Jet. So I did, without hesitation. He needed stability, and I could provide it. At first it was small things. Picking him up from soccer practice, helping with homework, making sure he had what he needed when Chloe couldn't. I mean, it's overwhelming. I feel like I don't even know who I am anymore. She's always there, always everything. I can't breathe. There was a long silence before Bryson replied. "You need to talk to her. Tell her you need some space. This isn't healthy, Jet. And you know that." "I can't," Jet said, his voice breaking. "I don't want to hurt her. She's all I've got." Bryson sighed. "You have to, for both of your sakes." Hearing those words was like a blow to my chest. I realized I wasn't just hurting myself, I was hurting Jet too. But I didn't know how to stop. I didn't know how to let go of the one thing that made me feel whole. Things between Jet and me had been strained for a while, but I had refused to acknowledge it. He was pulling away more and more, spending hours locked in his room or with Bryson and Scarlett. The little moments we used to share, laughing over a movie or cooking together, were becoming rare. I told myself it was just a phase, that he'd come back to me like he always did. But deep down, I felt the growing distance, and it terrified me. One night, I was scrolling through old photos on my phone. There was a picture of Jet from his 13th birthday, smiling at the camera with cake smeared on his face. I thought about how much had changed, how much I had given to him, and how much I needed him to stay close. I didn't realize then how selfish that need had become. But over time, it became much more. Jet was spending more time with Scarlett, and it was driving me insane. He would come home from school, say barely a word to me, and head out to see her. One evening, he mentioned that she had invited him to a party over the weekend. I could hear the excitement in his voice, but all I felt was dread. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" I asked, trying to sound neutral. "Parties at your age can get out of hand." Jet gave me a look I hadn't seen before, somewhere between annoyance and disappointment. "It's just a party, Aunt Malene. Scarlett's parents are going to be there. It's not a big deal." "But what if—" He interrupted me. "What if what? Can't I have a life of my own?" "You don't have to worry about me, Aunt Malene. I'm not a kid anymore." I froze. He had never spoken to me like that before, and it hurt more than I wanted to admit. "I'm just trying to look out for you," I said softly. "I know," he replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "But it feels like—" He trailed off. "I have to go. See you in the morning." I was there for everything. Every game, every school event, every parent-teacher meeting. I became the person he turned to when he was upset, the one he trusted when he needed to talk. I thought I was doing the right thing, that I was helping him. But trust is fragile. It takes years to build, and only one moment, one choice, to completely destroy it. I didn't see the warning signs, or maybe I didn't want to. The conversation ended, but his words lingered in my mind all night. I couldn't sleep replaying his statement. "Can I have a life of my own?" I knew he was right. I'd been holding on too tightly, afraid that if I let him go, I'd lose him completely. The tension came to a head a few days later. Jet had just returned from hanging out with Bryson, and something was clearly off. He walked past me without a word, heading straight for his room. I followed, knocking lightly on the door before stepping inside. "Hey," I said quietly. "Are you okay?" He didn't respond immediately. Sitting on the edge of his bed, with his head in his hands, he finally looked up at me. His eyes were filled with an emotion I couldn't place. Pain, anger, maybe even fear. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady but low. My stomach sank. "Okay," I replied, sitting in the chair across from him. "What's going on?" He took a deep breath, hesitating as if reconsidering his decision to speak. But then he began, and his words hit me like a punch. I didn't want to admit that the boundaries were blurring, that what I thought was love and support had become something else entirely. "I don't even know how to say this, but I felt like I couldn't tell you no for a long time," he said, his voice trembling. "It feels like I don't have a choice, and it's tearing me apart." His words caught me off guard, leaving me speechless. Jet, I don't understand, I stammered. He turned his gaze away, his jaw tightening. I've been trying to figure this out for months. Why I feel like this. Why I keep going along with things I don't want to do. And I think it's because I don't want to disappoint you. But I can't keep doing this. His words lingered, heavy and suffocating as I sat there frozen. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that everything we'd done had been mutual, consensual. But deep down, I knew he was right. I had crossed boundaries that should have never been crossed, and now I was witnessing the consequences unfold right in front of me. After he left the room, I stayed seated for what felt like hours, replaying the conversation in my mind over and over. How had I allowed things to reach this point? How had I convinced myself that what I was doing was okay? The weight of it all was overwhelming, and I realized I couldn't carry it on my own anymore. The next day, I reached out to Rebecca Pina, my closest friend since college. She had always been the one person I could rely on to tell me the truth, no matter how hard it was to hear. When I confided everything to her, she didn't hold back. You need to take a hard look at yourself, Malene, she said firmly but not unkindly. You can't start to fix this unless you own up to all of it. I know, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I just don't know how to make it right. You can't fix this overnight, she replied. But the first step is letting Jet go. He needs space to figure out who he is without you, and you need to figure out who you are without him.